sing great. Might as well just keep on singing. I read a little snip of an article that a preacher wrote. He was starting a class on the Ten Commandments. So to start with, he decided he'd just pose the class and just see how the memory was going. So he said, I want you to list as many of the Ten Commandments as you could. Afterwards, he said, the winner got 13. So I don't know if you can get all 13 of the Ten Commandments or not this morning. But if you do, you're doing real good. But I do want to talk about something a little more basic. And that is the things that we ought to know about being a servant. And you think, oh, well, no, I'm not sure I want to really discuss that topic. Well, it's not something that we can choose to or not to discuss, but rather it is something that is upon us as a Christian. You know, the Bible uses that term servant almost 1,000 times, 869 times. In the New Testament, however, it's only mentioned 136 times. A lot of those times it's mentioned by Jesus himself, and usually within parables. You're getting a little echo here. Christians are called to be servants. It's a common thing that Jesus used in discussing his relationship with his Christians, friends, with them being his servants. Matthew 25:21, ending one of the parables or wrapping up, the master speaks to his assembly, his servants, and he sends them out. And when they return back, it says, the Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things, and I'll now make you ruler over many things. It's a term that Jesus used when he talked to his apostles, Matthew 23:11. But he who is greatest among you shall be your servant. In John 18:36, when Jesus is talking now to Pilate, and they're discussing this idea of, well, whose kingdom do you belong to? And he said, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight. You see, he's relating who we are as being servants all the way through. Now, the problem is, it is degrading when you think about it. It's a very lowly task, but it's so basic that any one of us can be a servant. I'm grateful that we all don't have to be song leaders, because some of us would be another failure at it. Some would do very good. But the qualification that Jesus gives that he wants all of us to be is not song leaders or preachers, but to be a servant. Any one of us can serve in a variety of different ways. So this concept of service and being a servant is basic to what Jesus did in this life before his apostles and what he instructed them about. And they had a rough time about it, because it referred to this lowly work life ethic that was for the servants, not for the leaders of the church. And I think that's why Jesus quite often came back to that same concept to his apostles quite frequently, is because they didn't really want to accept that. It's not something we look forward to. You don't get up in the morning and think, boy, I'm going to be a servant today. It's rather, no, I'm going to, go out and lead or make or do or something. And that idea of being a servant is just not very fitting in our society. Matthew 9:35. Jesus, in the midst of leading and directing and training his apostles, had what you could call a come to Jesus meeting. This one was. Matthew 9 says, and he sat down and he called his disciples to them. Now you think about it. If you've got a small family and you've got 3 or 4 boys, you know how they can be when they're together. And Dad says, boys, come in here. Sit down. You go, yes, sir. You're going to have one of those meetings. And that's kind of how I'm relating the context And he sat down. Get over here, man. We've got to talk about this. And the lesson wasn't phenomenal. It wasn't written on a chalkboard. It didn't require a lot of understanding. He said, if anyone desires to be first, as they are all striving to be the best they can be and outdo one another in the process, if anyone desires to be first, let him be last of all and servant of all, is what Mark writes in the words of Jesus. And I think it's why, at the very end of Jesus' time on this earth, when you turn to John 13, as you find Jesus exemplifying exactly what he meant by all of this, because at that point, the apostles still hadn't gotten the point. They understood what serving was about, probably better than any one of us ever could, because they watched people being servants, real slaves, and they saw all this happening, and they didn't want to be that, the one that was always commanding, hey, you, come over here, do this, fix that, shine my shoes, do this, and we don't want to be that kind of thing. And it's exactly what Jesus wanted his people to do. And so they come together, the Passover feast is about to be served, and they're in that upper room. John 13 sets the setting, and this is a rented room. And there was a bowl of water and a pitcher there for somebody to wash the feet. But there wasn't a servant on hand. And so in comes the men, one by one. They're all looking around, and there's the bowl. Where's the servant? That was the message. Where's the servant? And so after they got through eating with all of those stinky feet, Jesus got up, wrapped a towel around himself, and he went up and he washed their feet. It's embarrassing that I speak the lesson, because Jesus didn't get up and preach to them. Now, y'all haven't learned this yet. He didn't say a word. His message was action. I'm not going to do that this morning. It would be embarrassing in a sense. But it was exactly what Jesus was trying to make them understand. You're missing the whole thing. You're trying to avoid what you've actually got to become to be my disciple. And I think it goes counterculture in our society. And so we want to strive for the educated and all of these other things, and we miss what we're supposed to be, you see. So that's one basic point as we lead into this. And still, I'm pretty convinced that in the minds and the hearts of some of you, you're going, I don't want to do that. That's not what I want to be. And it's not what the apostles wanted to be either. They had to learn that process. And 3 years with Jesus, you'd think they'd have learned it. And the very last thing he left them with wasn't a doctrinal discussion of the church and all these other things. And they needed to know that. And the Spirit would inspire them. But Jesus needed them to understand, you're going to be a servant and die doing it. Okay. So let's talk about just a bit of this here. Number one, a servant does not need to be lazy, but rather needs to be faithful. We'll take it with the balance of the negative versus the positive, but I want to lay into this idea of laziness because Jesus talks about it. In Matthew chapter 25, there are 3 parables that are laid out there. Now, this is the end of Jesus' life. It's in the latter part of he's got a few days left, and he's discussing judgment scene, basically. And what we're going to be judged by in all 3 of these parables, the parable of the wise and foolish virgins, the parable then of the talents, and the third one just basically a discussion of the judgment scene. All 3 of these relate to somebody working hard and doing what they're supposed to be doing. And in the discussion, in the parable of the talents, where he gives out, if you'll recall, if you've read this parable, where he gives out certain sums of money, talents of money is the term used. Strangely enough, the word now today, it refers to ability, and he gave that to them according to their abilities. And everybody was getting the same amount of responsibility, but only according to what they could handle by the ability that God had given them. And so some got this amount, and some got that amount, and some got just a little bit. And the guy that got the 1 talent of money, that sum of money, he took and he buried, if you remember the discussion. And when he got through, and the master came back and called to accounts, he found the money, got it out, and handed it back and said, "Here it is, I've not lost it." Do you remember the comment that Jesus said, that the master said to the servant? "You wicked and lazy servant." That term, lazy, is so derogatory, so demeaning, so defining, that God says, this is exactly what I never want to see you be. Lazy in what I put you in charge of, in what we're having. And the thing is that the other two guys, I don't know how, what, Jesus wasn't really in defining the details, other than they came back and they had an increase. They worked hard. They did something with what they were. And so here we're having these parables and the other discussion here going on of what it is. And it's an example of faithfulness versus laziness. And so we've got to be mindful of that process. Now, this idea of who's faithful and who's not is not my responsibility to find who you are and what you're to be doing. That's between you and God and what's written in the Scriptures. But it's very evident that too often we're looking at everybody else and measuring ourselves in comparison. And it's a whole lot like what Jesus has this discussion about in Luke 18. As he talks about these two people that went up to the temple to pray. Maybe you've read that. And one's a Pharisee. Defining the Pharisee for you here is the guy that's got it together. He knows all of the Scriptures. He can check off his list of all the things that he does right. He is the legalist in every form. He's not just a good Jew, but he gets to wear a title for it. And so he's there for all the services, for all the prayer things, for all the activities. He ties exactly so down to the point that Jesus even discusses the fact that he goes out in his garden and he's going through his little different flowers and all these herbs, and then he's giving a tenth of every one of them, not leaving anything out. And so the Pharisee goes up to pray, and the sinner's up there too. The sinner doesn't deserve to be there, and the sinner knows he doesn't deserve to be there because he knows he's a sinner. And Jesus starts the parable out, and he says, now the Pharisee, he prays like this. And the discussion goes on, kind of like, Lord, I've got it together. Me and you, we're working on this. I do these things. We've got a good thing going. I serve, and I do this. And maybe he looks back behind him, the way Jesus discussion, and he says, I'm not like that guy back there. He doesn't even come up front. He's sitting in the back. It's where he belongs. I'm not like him. You're lucky to have me here. I make this church run. And Jesus says, when the two of them left, only one of them left, being justified. And it wasn't the guy that had it together. Because he didn't understand this idea of who he was in relationship to God. This idea of being a servant is not like, I'm going to compare my life to these people over here. And look at, Lord, I'm doing a lot better than them, so therefore I'm a good servant. It's how good, David, are you doing compared to what you ought to be doing, you personally? The measurement is in the Scriptures and in the mirror. I don't go around checking off who does this and who's capable of that, because everybody's got their own responsibilities and their own talents. And the flaw comes so quickly as we start looking at everybody else. And we want to see if we're a faithful servant or not. It's rather the analysis and the comparison and the measurement. The defining moment is when I look in the mirror and I can see yes or no between me and God and what God wants me to do. And maybe you're with me and maybe you're not. honestly, about this idea of being a servant. Because it's a very difficult task, demeaning, difficult not in accomplishing, but it's drudgery. It's day in and it's day out. And you can't say, well, I didn't know how to serve, because anybody can serve in some way or another. It's just there. Getting there. Well, Colossians 3 verse 5 talks about putting to death the worldly things of our body. Getting self out. And I visualize, and probably some people are grateful I didn't do this, because my illustrations sometimes lack in communication. Sometimes they're just a little bit rough. But I'd envisioned that when the garbage cans from down here and up here, and I was just going to get into it, I thought, you'll be falling on the floor for sure. And they stick a sign on the front that says recycle. Got to start over again. So I'm not going to trip. I'm not going to fall. The sermon doesn't end so quickly then. But we get rid of self. We put ourselves in the garbage can and we say, recycle me, Lord. We've got to change. Paul defines it in Romans 12, verse 1. And some of you go, aha, I know what that passage says. Okay, are we doing it? I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present yourself, not everybody else, just between you and God, you present yourself a living sacrifice. That's getting me out of the picture. Holy and acceptable, which is your reasonable service. I'm quoting the passage if you're not missing it there. It's just a reasonable thing to start with. To get to be the servant, you've got to get rid of self. And all of those things, because it's not about me and how good I can be, except that I've got to measure myself according to myself and try to do better, improve in those things, but it's not about what I can do for me in getting out of it. And then I've got to shift gears and I've got to put God in and add Him into this equation. The best passage that I can think of is Galatians 2:20. And here's how Paul defines it. I've been crucified with Christ. There's your start. You got rid of self. Nevertheless, I live. But not I, but Christ now lives in me. And the life that I now live in the flesh, I'm still alive, I live by the faith of the Son of God. Removing self, crucify with Christ. But you're going to keep living because you're still alive. But it's not you anymore, it's Christ in you. And if you've got Christ in you, growing in you, it will lead you in a service direction. It will cause you to get on your knees more often than running away from whatever. It's an engagement of being a volunteer. Third point we're picking up here. It's an opportunity to volunteer. Exodus chapter 20. I want you to look at this passage with me. We've been quoting some, and maybe you jotted some of those things down, and if so, good, go back and read them again. Strange that we're going to the Old Testament passage, but it's about servants. But this is an earthly servant issue here. Slavery, back in those days. Verse 2. If you buy a Hebrew servant, now this is God's people who are Hebrews buying some of their own people. If you buy a Hebrew servant, he shall serve you 6 years. And in the 7th, he shall go free and pay nothing. You see, he could have bought himself out earlier, but if he doesn't do that and he stays all the way through, after a period of time, he's free. But, verse 5, but if the servant in this process plainly says, I love my master, my wife that he's gained in the process there, and my children, I don't want to go free. Then his master shall bring him to the judges. Begins to explain all these big tribunal people in the Hebrew tribe there. And he shall bring him, that is the servant, now to the door, or to the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl. Ice pick type device. And he shall serve him forever. You see the picture going on here? I want you to watch what's going. Because this guy has been serving for 6 years, and he knows exactly what's required of a servant. He understands the good and the bad of it. You know, there's good and bad, a lot of different things. Wherever you're working, whatever you're planning to study, whoever you're planning to marry, or if you've already married, there's some good and there's some bad. And he sees it all. He understands the task. And he says, I want this. I'm willing to give my life for it now. And then the master backs him up, and he puts his ear up there. Picks up the awl, puts it up there, and slams it through. And the guy is smiling the whole time. This is my choice. It's not punishment. It's privilege. I did it for this long, but this is the life that I want. I want to be your servant, O Master. And this is what God is calling for us to accept. Because it's not this degrading task. It's not punishment. It's privilege. Several years ago, Chris Willis and I made our first trip to Nicaragua. You hear us talk a lot about Nicaragua. It was probably the roughest journey I'd ever had. We were in the middle of nowhere. There was no electricity, so there were no fans. Those that have gone before and think you had it rough because you had a fan and didn't have AC. There were no roads. There were no cars. We got up the river in a boat to get to the place in the middle of nowhere to be there. And we were crammed in this little tiny schoolroom in these little bitty tents of a thing. I don't even know why we put a tent inside, but we had it in there. And we crammed in with luggage and everything else. We get out and we worked hard all day long. Now, in this group, I want you to picture this. There was a doctor. There were several doctors, but one of the guys that was in the group was a non-Christian who volunteered to come on this because his wife had just left him, or his girlfriend. I don't remember the picture exactly. And he was about to go crazy, and he didn't know what to do. And someone suggested you just need to get away and rethink life and what you're up to. And somehow he got put in contact and he volunteered. And here he is in Nicaragua, and he is sweating this out. He was missing his cold beer. It was the lifestyle that he never dreamed he'd have. And here were all these other people, most of them Christians, all of them except for him. And he was just sweating it out. And he was thinking, oh my goodness, why did I sign up for this? This is the worst punishment ever. And so the week went by, and finally he was going home, back to his old lifestyle, with the AC and everything else. And we were loading up all our bags and stuff on the airplane, and he was so glad. I'm going home, and punishment's over, And then, as I was loading stuff, I was planning on staying another week because I was going to go visit one of the guys we were supporting after that week. And it come to dawn on the guy that I was loading everybody else's stuff, and I was turning around and leaving. He goes, where are you going? I said, I'm staying here another week. He goes, what did you do? It all depends on your perspective. You see, I was glad to do that. Yeah, it was tough. But it was an opportunity. It all depends on your perspective, how you look at this idea of serving. It could be like, oh, what did you do to get that task? Or it could be, like I wrote in the bulletin, I served at the pleasure of my Lord and Jesus Christ. It's that volunteer spirit. Paul describes it in Philippians chapter 2, starting in verse 5. He says, have this mind in you, which is also in Christ Jesus. And then it talks about what he did. That he left heaven, and he came to this earth, and he took on the form of a servant, and even went to the cross. And this is what we're called to do. Everything that we're engaging in as a Christian has to deal with us serving God and one another. And it's a degrading task because not everybody always likes that, you know. And not everybody always likes to be served. Thus you go back to the discussion between Peter and Jesus. When Peter was there and Jesus was about to wash his feet, and it embarrassed Peter. No, you're not going to do my feet. He said, yes, I will. Because we got a relationship. If not, you don't have a part with me. Oh, then we'll wash me all over. That was Peter in his remarks. But, you know, it was so neat because he understood at least a little bit about that. It's everything we're about. In that relationship, serving, things you ought to know are very basic. Here's my reward. I'm ready to take it on. Are you serving? Now this is your measurement, okay? Put the mirror up there. Don't compare to anybody else. Am I doing what I ought to do? Should I do a better job? Should I come forward because I really haven't done it at all? I'm just visible at it. Should I come forward because I've never really stepped out and said, I'm ready to take you on? In baptism, that is. I'm ready to commit my life in service. It's a call to be servants. What makes a church is what changes the world. It's what Jesus is all about. That's who we are. If you're not part of it, you won't be. You have an opportunity to get your life right. While we stand, please come.